The 1969 New York Mets shocked the world when, despite the long shot odds, they won the World Series against the prohibitive favorites, the Baltimore Orioles. Buckle on up as you are about to listen to utterly fascinating stories about baseball legends from a key player and slugger on that miracle Mets team.
Welcome to the Motivation Show podcast, where we interview remarkable world-class experts that help bring out the greatness within you. Top book authors, super successful business people, and outstanding special guests that will motivate and inspire you with their incredible, uplifting stories and life-changing tips and strategies. Our goal is your success. If you desire more out of life, you've dialed into the right show. So fasten your seatbelts, friends, and let's get ready for some high-octane motivation. Now, your host, the mayor of motivation, Eli Marcus.
Our guest today was an integral part of not only arguably the most famous baseball team of all time, but perhaps the most famous sports team of all time, the 1969 New York Miracle Mets. This lefty slugging right fielder went on to hit a robust 300 that year. This helped the Mets win their first pennant, beat the Hank Aaron-led Braves in the National League Championship Series, and then went on, to everyone's disbelief and amazement, including mine, to beat the heavily favored Baltimore Orioles in the World Series in just 5 games. He has authored 2 books, including his current one, After the Miracle, the amazing story of the 1969 Mets team and the trip he organized a few years ago with a few other 1969 Mets teammates to visit the ailing Tom Seaver at his home in California. He is about to tell us the story of that magical Miracle Mets season and his incredibly well-written and fascinating book, which I personally had the pleasure of reading. Welcome to the Motivation Show number 24, Art Shamsky.
No, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, Art, you're a podcaster yourself, so you know a little bit about podcasting. And so I am going to maybe regret doing this, Art, but I am going to prove to you what kind of a Mets fan I actually was and still is, and that I am an original Shea Stadium bleacher bum that actually grew up nearby in Flushing, Queens. Are you ready for some big time proof, Art?
No, yeah, it's funny. I run into people now who have so many stories about having come to the games at Shea and even to Polo Ground. So I'm always interested in those kind of things to look back in some of those fun, great times that's Met history.
Well, here we go, Art, because again, I'm going to do something I may regret later. Don't laugh too hard, but here we go. Meet the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and meet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your friends. Guaranteed to have the time of your life because the Mets are really sacking those balls, hitting those home runs over the wall. East side, west side, everybody's going down to meet the METS Mets of New York Town. A James
Beautiful.
Jarvis
Love it.
classic.
Love
Huh?
it. Jane
Well,
Jarvis, exactly.
right?
Yeah. Queen of Shea.
Yeah, I'm going to keep my day job, Art.
Yeah. Well, no, it's great. Listen, that brings back great memories for me. I just, I played 13 years, and for all intents and purposes, nobody ever talks about the other 12. It's really about 1969 and being part of that Met team. And then, of course, I was there in '68 when we were not too good a team. But I'm always fascinated by fans that come up to me and talk about those early years with the Mets. They have great stories, and it's just fun to talk to them and talk to you like that. And you knew every word of the song. So how can I say anything bad about that?
I bought a lot of those $1.30 bleacher seats, and there was $1.30 literally in those days. I remember it.
Well, I remember in 1969, quite honestly, a box seat for the World Series, I think, was $8. So, it's a different world. Obviously, now we can certainly talk about that in this program.
What a bargain, right, Art?
Yeah, it was a bargain, but yeah, and what's interesting also when you say that, I've met so many people along over the years that have told me that they snuck into the ballpark and they waited till a couple innings were over and then they somehow got into the ballpark. And I always tell them, that's the reason we never made any money, because most of the people were sneaking into the ballpark and not paying for tickets. But whatever way they could get into the ballpark was fine with me. It's interesting because it goes along with that thing I always hear from people about October 16th, 1969, when we won the World Series. Over the years, I've probably had 100,000 people tell me they were at that game.
Yeah.
When I hear that, I think about Shea and I say, well, as far as I know, it held about 52,000 people. And I guess, if they think they were there, then that's great. If they actually were there, that's great too. So it doesn't make any difference to me because so many people remember that particular date either in their lives or in the history of baseball.
There was only one game actually I didn't get into. I was not at that World Series championship game, but there was one game in July of 1969 that I couldn't get into. And I went and listened to it on the radio. It was in the ninth inning, and there was one out, and a guy by the name of Jimmy Qualls from the Chicago Cubs gets a base hit and ruins Tom Seaver's no hitter. What are your memories?
What's interesting about that game, and that was part of a season that was so incredible. So many interesting things happened to us that year. Black Cat running on the field, Steve Carlton striking out 18 or 19 of us, and we winning the game 4-3. Just the confrontations we had with the Cubs and all sorts of just eerie things happened that year. But what I think with that particular game, it's almost taken on a life of its own in the sense that he's become more notable about that game, almost perfect game, than if he would have pitched a perfect game. And I know that sounds a little crazy, but the reality of it is, it's so many people talk about that at bat by Jimmy Qualls, that particular game, and the reaction that Tom Seaver once the base hit happened. And so I think again, it's taken on a life of its own, and really was part of a season that was so incredible with so many different things. But that was just one game in a career that Tom Seaver had that was unbelievable in a sense. I got a chance to play against him in 1967 when I was with the Reds before I came over to the Mets, and it was interesting to see his evolution to being the great pitcher he became. In '67, I think we all thought he was going to be a pretty good pitcher, but nobody knew for sure that
I believe he was 16-12 or 16-13, like those 2 years.
Yeah, it might have been the National League Rookie Pitcher of the Year.
Yes.
Well, I do know that I hit a 3-run home run off of him in a game he was pitching a shutout, 7-0 at Shea in the ninth inning. I hit a meaningless 3-run home run in the game, and we talked about that when I got over to the Mets, and we brought it up initially, but never talked about it after that. So. But I got a chance to see him both sides, and I can honestly tell you that I think that the history will show that he's one of the best pitchers ever to pitch in the game. And this year, of course, the Mets are wearing a 41 patch on their uniforms, which I think is very apropos. So he just was an honor to play with and be part of that '69 team. But that one game you mentioned in '69 was just one of many that was unbelievable, and great series we had with the Cubs and the Cardinals and the Pirates, and so many big important games.
Yeah, there were so many memorable moments that live on in not only baseball lore, but in all the sports lore. When you think about Ron Swoboda's incredible catch, he was literally horizontal to the ground in the World Series. I mean, that to me, I can't think of another catch in history that was more meaningful and more iconic.
Well, you know what happened in that game, that particular catch, as people remember and talk about it now, that game, that particular catch he made was an unbelievable catch, but a run did score from third, tagged up. It was a sacrifice fly that was hit by Brooks Robinson. It tied the game, which was game 4, and then we went into extra innings and won that game. And Seaver was pitching in that particular game, and that Ron Swoboda always says, some people had a career, I had a catch. And that was an unbelievable catch that people will talk about forever. But in game 3, I started in that game, and of course I was in right field when Tommy Agee made that great catch in right center, and he also made the one in the left center, and had an unbelievable game where he saved runs and hit a home run in the bottom of the first. It was a kind of game that you dream of as a kid to have in the World Series. But I'm going to give you a little trivia that a lot of people don't know. So unfortunately, I'm part of it, but in some ways it's good, in some ways it's bad. I have the distinction of making the last out of the only game we lost in the World Series, and that was Game 1. And people don't, they either remember it or they don't remember it. It's no big deal. But we then went on to win the next 4 in a row, and the rest is history. But it was great to be part of that team, and the things you mentioned about the catches in the World Series and Seaver's game during the season are just so vivid in my mind and so important in my life. And it's funny how those things have been passed on from generation to generation, and people who weren't even born know about that team and those particular plays from their parents or their grandparents. And I find it fascinating that people still talk about that. And what, 52 years? Is it 52 years now?
52 years, amazing.
Yeah, and what's amazing is that you said it when you were introducing me, and thank you for that nice introduction. That it's interesting if you look back in the history of baseball. And I say this with all due respect to all the other teams in the game. I really believe the 27 Yankees are so memorable because of who was part of that team.
Oh yeah, Murderer's Row.
And Garrick and all those great players. But when you ask somebody who won the World Series in 1986 or 1994, unless they're really a big fan of that team, or 19 whatever it might be, they don't know who won the World Series. But if you ask somebody who won in 1969,
yep,
they know the New York Mets won the World Series.
Not only the Mets, but we had 2 other great teams, didn't we, in New York City that year?
Yep, that's right. It was a year. That was my first book called The Magnificent Seasons. And when the Jets won the Super Bowl in January, we won the World Series in October, and the New York Knicks won the NBA championship in May of '70. And what's interesting about those 3 teams that all of us won for the first time, and nobody had ever won before, which I thought was really fascinating. But again, just going back to that 1927 and 1969, I don't mean to compare our team to that incredible team the Yankees had, but people do know who won the World Series in '69, and I think that's just an incredible legacy about that team.
Well, what strikes me about your book is how humble you are, because you do talk about you making that last out in that first World Series game. And, 1969 was a magical year. There was a lot going on, good and bad. Of course, there was the Vietnam War was raging. And then we had the first man on the moon landing, Neil Armstrong. We had Woodstock. And then, of course, the Miracle Mets came along. And you guys gave hope to the rest of the world. You gave hope in a year where there was a lot of unfortunate, death from Vietnam, let's face it. And you guys came on and you gave us a reason to smile. And that is another reason why you'll be remembered forever. Also, the first 7 years of the Mets didn't go exactly well, starting in 1962, the Casey Stengel years.
Well, that's
They're the lovable losers.
That's exactly right. My first book, The Magnificent Seasons, was about the 3 teams and their history and how that all came about. But the reason that this team still is talked about is exactly what you said. We made people feel better about their lives for a brief period of time, because as the world, as we know right now, was upside down, but the world back then in the late '60s was really upside down. The war in Vietnam was tearing this country apart. I mean, there was so many bad things happening. When I was writing this book, I tried to use timeline events to show what was going on in the city and the country and the world when things were going on with these particular seasons with the Jets, the Mets, and the Knicks. And I just couldn't find any good news. It was always bad news, whatever was going on in the world at the time. I remember when the Knicks won their championship in May, I think it was 7th or 8th of May in '70. I was looking for something that happened around that time. And for those who remember, 3 days before that championship ended up with the Knicks winning and beating a terrific Laker team, we had the shootings at Kent State, where 5 of the students were killed and 8 or 9 were injured by our own troops, the National Guard. And so that was what really was happening in the world at the time, and which made those teams really that much more important. But getting back to the Mets, is that you're right. We made people feel better about their lives. They tagged on to us from about the middle of August on, when we started to play incredible baseball. And we just made them believe that there was some light at the end of the tunnel. And I get people coming up to me now who would just always thank me for doing that. And I always feel like if we as athletes can make somebody feel better about their lives, and we really accomplish something. So I'm always so thrilled to meet somebody, a Vietnam veterans. I get that all the time, who were in Vietnam and tell me they were in the worst place in the world, but we made them. They heard about the games, or they happened to listen to it, whatever it might be. We made them feel better about their lives for a brief period of time. And I think that really is the true legacy of the team. And I think that's been passed on from generation to generation. And 50 years later, or 52 years later, it's amazing that even though we've lost a nucleus of a number of guys who were important to that team, there's still enough guys around to celebrate being part of that incredible team. And so I'm thankful of that. But it never grows old for me to hear stories and to talk to people like yourself who remember that time and remember how great it was for baseball in New York and what we did for the city of New York. And so I'm always glad to talk about it because it was so important to my life changed October 16, 1969. I'm still in New York because of it. Everything I do is basically because I played on that team. And I know, I played for other teams and I've played 13 years, but nobody, for all intents and purposes, wants to talk about the other 12. It's really about 1969.
People don't bring up the Cincinnati Reds as much as they will the Mets, even though you started there.
I've got great memories from those teams, and I was the prelude to the Big Red Machine. And I know a lot of those guys who were part of that incredible mid 70s team, but really it's my life is really based on my baseball life is really based on my time with the Mets for all intents and purposes. And so, I'm appreciative of that. And I'm thankful for that and for the fans who still remember that and want to talk about it.
Well, I'm going to bring you back earlier than the Mets. I'm going to bring you back to the Cincinnati Reds in your first days, and I'm going to actually hear about your teammate Pete Rose, who's the all-time hit leader. And did you see it back then in his rookie years that he was going to become this iconic all-time great hit leader?
Absolutely not. We started together in 1960. Myself, Pete Rose, and Tony Perez. Tony, of course, is in the Hall of Fame. Pete, more hits than anybody in history game, and probably should be in the Hall of Fame. And myself, three guys who eventually made it to the big leagues. But when you saw Pete first play, when he came to join us after his graduation in high school in 1960, you would have said, there's no way this guy is going to get any higher than where we were, which was Class D, the lowest classification of baseball you could possibly play at Geneva, New York, up in the New York Penn League. As a matter of fact, as we became friends and played a number of years together, the next year they kept him back in Class D another year. He went to Tampa and Florida State League, and Tony stayed up in Geneva. So both of those guys played 2 years of Class D baseball, and they moved me to Topeka, Kansas in the 3I League. And I ended up playing there for Dave Brister, who eventually managed the Reds and went on to a career as a manager in the big leagues. But the Reds were always developing good players back then. Remember, that was a period of time when there was only 16 teams. They didn't expand.
The good old days. I like it that way.
Well, that's another time we can go into that discussion. But the reality of it is, it was tough to make it to the big leagues back then because there wasn't that many teams. So, but to answer your question, Pete couldn't play. The only thing he could do was really run hard to first base after a walk.
Charlie Hustle. He was still Charlie Hustle. Yeah.
And then we were together in Macon, Georgia in 1962, and something happened from the period when we played in 60 to 62. He started developing his skills and really turned his whole game around. And I think he led the league in hitting, and that was then called the Sally League. I was playing for Macon. It was a Reds farm team, and really good players on that team. Dave Bristol, again, was the manager, and a number of those guys went to the big leagues. But to answer your question about Rose, that was the year that he really developed into being a player. And the next year they brought him to spring training in Cincinnati and in Tampa. We were training in Tampa. And he made the Reds ball club in 63, became Rookie of the Year, and the rest is history.
What do you think changed? Do you think it was his mindset? Do you think it was just his way of practicing?
I think what happened to him is he went down to Tampa in 61, another Class D team in the Florida State League. He played for Johnny Vandermeer. And Johnny Vandermeer's
double no hit Johnny Vandermeer.
2 hitters in a row.
Yep.
and he worked hard on his game. I don't know if I wasn't there, so I don't know if Vandermeer worked with him or got somebody to work with him, but I think his determination really was the thing that really made it happen for him. And he started working on things. He started on working on his fielding and obviously his hitting. He was a switch hitter from the time we started together, but just really couldn't hit very well. And all of a sudden, I think in '62 he just started to become a whole well-rounded player, and the rest is history. I don't know exactly what happened, except I think he's one of these guys that worked hard on his game. He would be a guy that if we finished practice and was playing second base, he took some ground balls, he would stay out there and take another 25, another 40, another 50 ground balls. And if he flubbed one, he would go back to starting counting over again. He was one of those guys that did that, and that's really what happened.
Such a great inspirational lesson to all of us, how it doesn't matter where we are right now. Doesn't mean that's where we're going to end up if we just keep
Well,
applying ourselves.
just to take it one step further, I know there's a big controversy about whether he should be in the Hall of Fame or not. What the sad part of that whole scenario is that here's a guy that had more hits than anybody in history of the game, has so many records, National League records, switch hitting records, all sorts of all-star records, 4 or 5 different positions as an all-star. But here's the thing that really gets me is that, and more people now are swaying towards him being in the Hall of Fame than a few years ago. A few years ago, there was a number of people didn't want him in, but I think that's starting to change. Whether we see that in our lifetime, I don't know. But here's the thing that really drives me crazy is that of all the people who don't think he should be in, who do not think he should be in, 99 and 9/10% of those wish everybody played the game like him.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part of that whole scenario.
No one played harder. Yep.
But I just don't know if we'll see it in our lifetime. They're pretty adamant about keeping him off the ballot for whatever reason. But listen, we could take hours talking about the Hall of Fame and where that's gone from the time I was a kid and the time I started playing, and my idolizing the guys who made it into the Hall of Fame and where it's transpired to now. It's not the same Hall of Fame that it was a number of years ago, and the game's not the same as it was a number of years ago. But that's a different conversation at some point, I think. And I think the way the rules are now with guys going back in, look at these guys, these managers who cheated, who are back in the game. They cheated, got a year suspension, but they're now back in the game. But gambling is the one no-no that people are adamant about keeping people out of certain things. And so I'm not sure we'll see Pete in the Hall of Fame in our lifetime.
Yep. Well, I want to brag on you a little bit, actually, because a lot of people don't realize that in 1969, you platooned in right field with Ron Swoboda. And when you combine both of your stats between you both, you hit a combined 24 home runs and you knocked in 99 runs, which if you put you both together, that would make you an all-star. And so you could have started for almost any other team in baseball. But in your book, you talk about how your legendary manager, Gil Hodges, was big on platooning players. And most players probably would not be happy being a platoon player when they know they could have started elsewhere. How did you cope with that? And how did you feel about platooning?
Be honest with you, nobody liked it. It was not good for your everyday play, although we did have good years, and it wasn't good for your career because that's what you just couldn't put up the numbers, and they would hold that against you when you were trying to make a few dollars more whenever you went to contract negotiations. But the reality of it was we had the utmost respect for Gil Hodges, and that was the way he managed. Gil had a feel for the game, unlike managers today who really rely on sabermetrics and printouts. And Gil was a manager who understood the game and the players at the end of the bench and knew at some point he would need them, and got everybody involved. And at some point early in the season, he decided to start platooning, and he platooned in 4 positions and occasionally 5: first base, second base, right field, third base, and occasionally behind the plate. Again, nobody liked it. It wasn't good for your career. And I'll give you a perfect example. I had a terrific playoffs against Atlanta. I had 7 hits and 13 at-bats. We swept Atlanta in the playoffs, first year of the playoffs in the National League and American League. And I don't start the first game of the World Series because they were pitching left-hander, Mike Cuellar. He did send me in the pinch hit in the 9th inning with the game on the line. And I ended up grounding out to second base, and that was the last at bat in the first game we lost, and the only game we lost in the World Series. I will tell you this, though, and a lot of people don't know this, and I mentioned it in the book. I think about that at bat every day of my life. That was an at bat that I'll never never get out of my mind. It was a little pitch that he threw right over the plate, and I grounded out to second base. I could have just as easily hit it out of the ballpark, but it could have been a hero and ended up grounding out. But I think about that at bat every single day. But just getting back to your question about how did we cope with it, we just dealt with it because it was working, and we had the utmost respect for Gil Hodges. And so I think you could look at all the positions that he platooned in at first base. They got a great year out of Clendenin and Cranepool together, Boswell and Weiss at second base, and then Garrett and Ed Charles at third base. He just got the most out of everybody, and I think he proved that feel, the manager, the way he managed by feel worked. And now we've kind of segued in the game today where everything is on printouts, and management makes out the lineups for the most of the time. And so Gil was a different kind of manager. So I think, to answer your question, I think we just respected Gil too much. We didn't like it, but it was working, so we dealt with it. And
That's
for
the
everybody.
ultimate. You were the ultimate team player.
I think it's important to understand that we all pulled for each other too. There was never a situation where we were hoping that somebody would make an out in a certain situation. That was never the case. We all were very good friends. Ronnie Swoboda and I speak often, even today, and I pulled for him, and I'm pretty sure he pulled for me when we were out there, and it just was working, and he got great results out of it.
Well, that's a great lesson for business, for life. How working as a team is more important than individual stats. And a lot of people talk it. You lived it that year for sure, and it all worked out at the end
Well,
of the day.
it's interesting too, to take it one step further. I think one of the true things that people remember about that is when you talk about 69, the 69 Mets, it's not just that you talk about Tom Seaver or Jerry Koosman or Cleon Jones or Tommy Agee. You do talk about everybody who was part of that team, because at some point they did something to help us win. And you can go all the way down to the end of the bench with Rod Gaspar and Duffy Dyer.
Everyone had a role. Yep,
Yeah, and Don Cardwell and
Al Mighty Weiss broke out in the World Series.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the true genius in Gil Hodges and the way he managed, because he got the most out of everybody. And I think that there's no doubt in my mind the Mets would have won more championships if Gil would have lived longer. And unfortunately, he died at a very young age. But I think people will remember that year, because of him, and obviously because of the players.
Well, I looked up salaries of that year, and I was astonished to find out that Tom Seaver earned a whole $40,000, and the glider Ed Charles earned $35,000. And then I think back to 1977, which most Mets fans do not have fond memories of, when the franchise, Tom Seaver, was sold away because the Mets didn't want to pay him $200,000, which in today's terms is quite a bit of a bargain.
Not even the minimum salary now. Minimum salary now, I believe, is $575, somewhere around there. And well, it's a different world. Everything in life is timing. It's just it's not. I don't begrudge these guys making the money they're making. I wish I was playing right now, making some of it, but it was a different world. You know what? The way I look at it, I've got nothing, no regrets. I played on that championship team. But the other thing I think is important to remember is that I got a chance to play with and against the greatest conglomerate of players in the history of the game. That I say 63 through early 70s. Look at the National League with Mays, Aaron, Clemente, Koufax, Drysdale.
The greatest era that I could remember.
It was just an incredible period. So for me to be part of that era and play against and with guys, I came up to Cincinnati, and Frank Robinson and Vada Pinson were there, Tommy Harper, and played with Bench and Rose and Perez and Lee May, and guys that went on to have great careers. And so just looking at some of the guys I played with and against, some of the pitchers in the National League at that particular time.
Can I ask you? I have a big question for you, because I want to talk about some of those Hall of Fame pitchers that you batted against, and I want to know, who would you rather not face in a 2-game series? 2 pitchers here from each team: Bob Gibson and Steve Carlton of the St. Louis Cardinals, Juan Marichal and Gaylord Perry of the San Francisco Giants, or Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale of the Dodgers.
It's interesting. Could I take one from each instead of both?
Yes. One from column A, one from column B.
Okay, definitely. Carlton was very tough. Koufax, of course, was really tough. And who was the third team? It was Koufax, Drysdale.
Marichal and Gaylord Perry, all Hall of
Well,
Famers.
Marichal, even though he was right-handed, was tough for me because I couldn't see the ball.
That
And
high leg kick.
and he would turn his back, and particularly out at Candlestick Park.
Windy.
Yeah, he was really tough, and you'd be freezing out there, and your eyes would be tearing, and the wind would be blustering, and he'd be kicking that leg way up and turning his back. And I had trouble with him early in my career, but as I got older and had more patience, he became less difficult. But Koufax, of course, was overpowering, and Carlton was tough on the left-handers. But batting left-handed for most against those guys in my career, I didn't have as much trouble with some of the right-handed batters, Gibson or Drysdale. Those guys, for me, were not as tough as the Carltons and the Koufaxes, obviously, and some of those tough pitchers. But listen, that whole era of pitching in the National League was really tough. I remember before San Diego came in the league, when you start in St. Louis, you get Gibson and Carlton, and you go to Los Angeles, you get Drysdale. You get Drysdale, Koufax, Don Sutton, and the left-hander, I can't think of his name. I'll think of it in a second. And then you go to San Francisco and you get Claude Osteen. And then you go to San Francisco and you get Marichal, Perry, and Mike McCormick, who had just come off a year where he won the Cy Young. So that West Coast trip was no fun, but it was great baseball, and you worked hard. You really had to pay your dues against those guys, but it was a great era. So I'm very lucky to have been part of it.
Who was the greatest ball player you ever played against, and why?
Well, it's hard to bet against or say anything against Mays because he was so great.
Number 24. Another guy, number 24.
Yeah.
You and him.
Yeah, well, he was a little better ball player than me, but I saw him in his prime of his career. But then you'd leave him and you'd go to Pittsburgh and you'd say, who's
Roberto Clemente.
Yeah, and then you go to not LA, you go to Atlanta and you'd see Aaron and you'd say, who's better than him?
Yep.
But then I played with Frank Robinson. You'd say, who's better than him? And you watch him every
Triple Crown winner in both leagues.
Unbelievable. So for me, but then you could go down the whole list. You had in the National League, you had great players in Billy Williams. You had bench. You had Orlando Cepeda, McCovey, Stargell, Willie Stargell. I mean, gosh almighty. I mean, I'm leaving out a bunch of them.
Pops. Yep.
Yeah, the whole National League was very, very tough. And then when the Reds traded Frank Robinson over to Baltimore, I think that was the beginning where the American League started to catch up with the National League in terms of stars and quality of baseball. But that National League in the 60s, from 63 on to early 70s, was really tough.
No one expected you to beat the Baltimore Orioles. Here they have two of the greatest legends of all time. Brooks Robinson, who, to me, I've never seen a fielder better than Brooks Robinson, human vacuum cleaner at third base. And of course, Frank Robinson. And of course, they had a stellar pitching staff, including Jim Palmer. Did you really believe that you were going to beat them?
Well, listen, you might forget we won 100 games that year, and during the regular season, they won 108, I believe. And even when we lost the first game that I talk about so much, is that in the World Series, we knew we had Koosman pitching the next day. They beat Seaver. And again, if we don't win that game in Baltimore, you'd come back to New York 1-1. We might lose 4 in a row, but they had a terrific team. And I do think the second game of the World Series was the most important in terms of us needing a victory. Some people think it was the third game when Palmer pitched against Gary Gentry. I do think the second game was the most important, and we come back to New York 1-1. And we got breaks. There's no doubt about it. A lot of things fell on our way. And, of course, we had the great series by Clendenin and Al Weiss, somebody that nobody would have thought of to be a hero. But the things fell on our way, and listen, if they played us, 10, 15 times, who knows how many they would have won. But we had a really good team. A lot of people forget that we won 100 games during the season. I think people forget that we had a great defensive ball club up the middle. We had Jerry Grody, who was a terrific catcher behind the plate, Al Weiss and Boswell at second, and Harrelson at short, and Tommy Agee in center field. Terrific defense up the middle. And even though they had 2 20-game winners that season, Palmer only won, I think, 17 or 18 that year. So they had 2 20-game winners. But they had a terrific pitching staff. But we had a better bullpen than they did. and it was proven in the World Series. And I would put Seaver and Kuzman up against their two starters, even though they both won 20 games, McNally and Mike Cuellar. What might think that we were overmatched, I look at it as a little different. I think we had a really good team that just played up to our capabilities and definitely got some breaks. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, in a few words, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of your iconic teammates. Let's start with Jerry Kuzman, the lefty number 2 pitcher.
Yeah, terrific pitcher. Was kind of hidden behind Seaver, but again, if we don't win that second game of the World Series, we don't come back and beat Baltimore.
As clutch as they come, right?
He's clutch. It's I called in the book after the miracle. I called the Seaver Van Gogh and Kuzman Patton, two different personalities. But if you ever wanted a guy on the mound that was going to battle for you, it was Jerry Kuzman. Terrific pitcher. Should have won more games than he did that year. I forget what the reasons were, but I just, in my mind, thinks he should have been a 20-game winner that season. Just a character on and off the field. Serious when he was pitching, but real character, a great teammate. I still talk to him all the time. He's out in Minnesota and ended up having a great career. He's borderline Hall of Fame. He had the couple bad years with the Mets subsequent to 1969, which hurt him, but he was a terrific pitcher.
Yeah. And Tug McGraw, your bullpen ace.
Who's that, McGraw?
Tug McGraw.
Oh, Frank McGraw, I like to call him. That was a lot of people didn't know his name was Frank, but Tug was another character that in the locker room was just unbelievable, fun on and off the field, but and really good reliever. Pitched some great baseball for us. Learned to throw the screwball, which really helped him, but. Tug was definitely died too young. He was 59 when he passed away. Was a great teammate, a terrific pitcher.
Came up with "You Gotta Believe," one of the greatest
That was
iconic slogans. Yeah, 73.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cleon Jones, who hit 340 that year, almost won the batting title, got beaten out by the guy by the name of Pete Rose and a few other guys.
One of the best hitters I've seen. Cleon that year was just terrific. You can mention all these guys, and every one of them. If we don't have them, we might not win the pennant or the World Series. Cleon was so instrumental, along with Tommy Agee in center field. But great year for Cleon. Hit 340 that year, and clutch hitter, and was just another great teammate.
How about the all-time leading pitcher in strikeouts and no-hitters, Nolan Ryan, when he was part of the worst trade in Mets history, and maybe all baseball history, perhaps next to the Babe Ruth trade. Did you have any inkling that Nolan Ryan would be that good?
Well, we knew he had a great arm. He used to throw batting practice for us, or to us, and he was just trying to impress Rube Walker, the pitching coach, and Gil, of course. And he would just throw as hard as he could in batting practice. It was a waste of time. He very rarely threw strikes, and so we'd go in there and just try to foul a pitch off. We knew he had a great arm. He pitched some great baseball that year, witnessed by how he pitched in the playoffs in the World Series. Pitched in Game 3 in the World Series and saved the game for Gary Gentry. Did we know he would become the pitcher that he became, Hall of Famer? Let me just say this: every team makes bad trades.
Yep.
You look in the history of baseball, every team has made bad trades.
Yep.
That, of course, looks like one of the worst, and turned out to be one of the worst. He went on to have a fabulous career. I would venture to say that we all knew that he had a great arm. Was he going to be the kind of pitcher that would win so many games over a course of a career? Nobody knew. I think going over to the American League really helped him, even though he was eventually faced a DH, an extra batter in the lineup. But I just think he went over to the American League and just kind of found himself over there. Whether it was a new pitching coach or just new hitters, I just don't know. But the Mets thought they were getting a good player in Jim Fregosi, who was probably at the end of his career. They wanted to get a third baseman. For the life of me, I'm not sure why they ever let Ed Charles go after 1969. He could have played another 2 or 3 years and been really important part of the team. It was an important part of the locker room. To answer your question, it turned out to be one of the worst trades ever in baseball. But again, every team makes bad trades.
Yeah, that's well said, Art. So after the miracle, your incredible book, which I couldn't put down, it chronicles a trip that you organized to visit the ailing star of the 69 Mets, of course, the greatest Met of them all, the one they called the franchise, Tom Seaver. Why did you organize the trip? Which teammates did you pick to join you? and why these particular teammates?
Well, After the Miracle was really born out of my desire to write a book about the 50th anniversary, which was coming up. This was 2017. Anniversary was coming out in 2019. I wanted to write a book that was not about the games, the day-to-day things that happened that season. I will venture to say that the New York Mets, the 1969 Mets, have had more books written about them than any team in the history of sports. I don't know how many, but no other team has had so many books written about them. And I just wanted to write something different. And I hooked up with a writer by the name of Eric Sherman, who had written a number of books before, written one on Davy Johnson, Mookie Wilson, the 1986 Mets. And I met Eric, and we talked about this philosophy of wanting to do. This would be my second book. He had written about 5 or 6 at the time, maybe 6 or 7. And we just wanted to do something different. And so we decided to talk about the relationships that developed from us winning that World Series that year, and how they've lasted almost all this period of time. And even though we lost a number of guys, we wanted to talk about the friendships and relationships that still go on. And so we decided to write this book in 2017, and we started to do some interviews. And Ed Charles was our first interview, and I'm so thankful we got to him. I'm so sad when he passed away, but it was important for us to talk to him at the time because he had so much to say about his life and his career and being part of that team. And after we did a couple of interviews, I said to Eric, or he might have said it to me, I said, I don't think we should do a phone interview with Tom Seaver. Even though he's not traveling now, we need to go out there and do this interview in person. And this was a beginning of the 2017 year, and we ended up going out there in May of 2017. And we decided that if we did that, to take a couple players with us and just reminisce with them. And the reality of this whole thing is we could take in any 3 players. It didn't make any difference. We were all friends. We decided to take Jerry Koosman because he was the second best pitcher on the team. Buddy Harrelson, who had just announced that he was starting to have early signs of Alzheimer's. And we decided to see if he could go with us and work it out with his family that he could. And Ron Swoboda, who made the great catch in game 4 when he was pitching, when Tom was pitching. And so we coordinated this trip to go out there. And again, we could have taken any 3 players. And for various reasons, these 3 worked out. Buddy was a little difficult because he was not well in terms of being able to travel, but we talked to his family, met him at the airport, held on to him as we got on the plane, and just really watched out for him on this trip. And coordinating the trip was just difficult because Swoboda was in New Orleans and Koosman was in Minnesota, and Ron Swoboda's wife had recently just had surgery and was not well. And so we tried to work around his schedule. He was doing some local TV broadcasting with minor league games in New Orleans, and we had to find an off day for him. And so, make a long story short, we coordinated this trip, and we. But there's a little bit more to the story because when I called Tom to talk to him about doing this, he said, "I'd love to see you guys. Let me work it out with my wife. She's got my calendar." And I talked to his wife, Nancy, and she said, "You guys can come all the way out here to California, and Tom might not be feeling very well. And then, he might just be a wasted trip." And so that was a little bit of a damper on it. But Eric Sherman and I decided to roll the dice. We got tickets for the guys. We paid for it ourselves out of our pocket. And we decided to fly out there on a Friday to San Francisco and then rent a car to go up to Calistoga, where he lived up in the Napa Valley, where he has the wine country, where he has the wine business. And so we got to California on this Friday, and I called to see how he was doing. And Nancy said, today's not a good day. He's not feeling well. It's going to be late in the afternoon by the time you get here. And let's try for tomorrow. We said, okay. But the problem we had was that tomorrow, being Saturday, was the only day we could do it because we had to leave Sunday to get connecting flights for the guys to get back. They had to be back Sunday. And you lose 3 hours going back east, or 2 hours in Koosman's case. That doesn't make any difference. The story is that we had to get back on Sunday. And so the next morning I called, and Nancy said, okay, get over here as soon as you can. He's feeling pretty good. Looking forward to seeing you. Well, we got there, drove about 40 minutes to get there. We stayed in the town about a little ways away because we couldn't get a room in Calistoga. Anyway, we got there and we spent 8 or 9 hours with Tom reminiscing about the team, our lives, how they changed, teammates. He showed us around his home with the wine acres, and it was just an incredible day of, like I said, 8 or 9 hours just reminiscing, and it was important for us to be there to talk to Tom in person as opposed to an interview over the phone. And as we were leaving and saying goodbye, it was bittersweet because we knew he wasn't well. He had really talked about not traveling anymore. He wasn't coming back east. He wasn't going to be back at Citi Field. He wasn't going to be back doing any of that kind of stuff. And so it was bittersweet in the sense that we knew that we might not see each other anymore, all of us. And it was tough. We'd already lost so many guys on that team. And so it was sad, but it was important, like I said, that we did this interview. And looking back, writing the book isn't about Tom Seaver in a sense, just about him, but it's about the trip to take out there to see him, and about the friendships and the camaraderie that we had as teammates, and how we still maintain those relationships at that point 50 years later. And I think that was important for us to show the fans and the people who were going to read the book about how close we were as a team and what that team did for all of us and all our lives, and how it changed our lives, and how we still remain friends. And I think the beauty of that book is that it's just not about the day-to-day things that happen during the season. Yes, people want to know what happened when the Black Cat ran on the field. They want to know this, they want to know that, they want to know how we won, etc. But I think it was important for us to talk about how close we became as teammates and friends. And as you mentioned it earlier when you talked about, when you were introducing me, is about how bad this team was early on from 62 on. And I think that was important to understand that for guys like Eddie Kranepool and Swoboda and Tug McGraw, who were there during some really awful years, and then for us to go ahead and win a World Series coming from 9th place the year before, a half game out of last place, that made us all even closer. And that's what we tried to get across in the book. And I'm hopefully, and I'm glad that people liked the way we did it. It was very sentimental. I've had people tell me they cried reading some of it. And our intention was to just make people understand that the human aspect of how this team became close and stayed together during these years. And again, we've lost a number of players that were important to the team. All were important to the team, including Gil and all our coaches except Joe Pignatano and key players on the team. But we still remain close and still love the fact that we help people get through some tough times in New York and still remain friends.
Well, I'm going to tell you, Art, after reading your book is like two books in one. Of course, it's like you said, about the 1969 Mets and all the wonderful things and magical things that happened that year. And it's also about, as you said, it's about teammates, who forge a lasting bond that lasts forever because you have things in commonality. You had a world championship, but more than a world championship, you had respect for each other. You platooned with each other. You didn't like it, maybe, but you understood it, and you didn't hold it against the other player that you platooned with. And I have to tell you something. I can see a Hollywood script in this. I would watch that movie. I would be anticipating.
Well, actually, there's been some talk about it, but I think we didn't even talk very much about guys like Ed Charles, who were so important to the team. He was the guy, and he was the glue in the clubhouse. He was the guy who had spent so many years in the minor leagues because of the color of his skin, and his life was so touching, and he knew how to deal with people and knew about people's lives. And he was the guy that would put his arm around you if you had a bad game, whether you were a pitcher or an outfielder or an infielder. He knew how to help you. And we had guys like Clendenin who would scream across the room to get on you about something, whether it was the way your uniform fit or the way your tie looked. And
great Clendenin.
So we had guys that would instigate. Yeah. We had guys that would put out the fire. So we had so many guys like that, and I relish those moments that I spent with the guys. And even when we get together now, I'm still close with Eddie Kranepool and Swoboda and Rod Gaspar and Kenny Boswell and guys that I love. And if they need me today, I'm on a plane to wherever they need me, and I'll be there. And that's important. And I think that book really showed how close we were. And when Seaver passed away, it was just a shock to all of us, because even though we knew he was sick, we were, you think those kind of guys can live forever because of the stature as
True.
a player and how important he was to the franchise. But life is precious, and as we've seen this past year or so with what's going on in the world and in the country and the city, and with the pandemic, and everything is kind of upside down now. But what we have, what I have, is that teammate, that glory that we had, that we can talk about, and I get a chance to speak with the people like yourself who reminisce with me and remember how important that team was. So for me, it's just a beautiful experience.
So, Art, being a big league baseball player is pretty much every kid's dream. Not only did you get to the majors, but you were successful and you played for, of course, one of the most iconic baseball teams in history. A lot of athletes say they appreciated the game more years later when they retired in retrospect than they did while playing. How about you?
I miss the game. I wish I was out there playing now for obvious reasons, but I really miss it now when spring training is going on. But I still have the memories, and I think that keeps me going. You can sit there and eat your heart out and say, "Wow, why are these guys making all the money? Why didn't it happen to me?" But you can't look at it that like that. You just have to. Life's about timing. It's about being in the right place at the right time. And again, I appreciate having played with and against some of the greatest players in the history.
And you had fun doing it. You don't look
I
back and
had
say,
fun.
"I
And
wish I had more." Yeah.
I'll tell you a very quick story. And I remember when Gil sent me up to pinch hit in the ninth inning of that first game, and that's that at bat I think about every day in my life, where I grounded out to second base. I had a little time on the on deck circle to think about exactly what you're talking about, and about my life, and when I was on the on deck circle thinking, you know, I thought back to when my dad took me outside when I was able to walk, and started soft tossing baseballs with me, and then playing little league baseball, which was then not little league where I grew up in St. Louis. It was called Corey League baseball, and I remember going from that to whatever level that little league was, and then American Legion ball, high school ball, minor league baseball, signing a professional contract, and all the bus trips and all the station wagon trips that we took in the minor leagues, when you traveled by station wagon, and all the practices, all the times I went out with my friends to play in the park and make up games. And I thought about that on the on deck circle. In about 30 seconds, my life passed in front of me. And I said to myself, all those things that I did as an amateur in minor leagues, it was to get to this moment in my life. Every kid's dream, playing in the World Series. And unfortunately, I wasn't a hero, but I just saying that to myself was what every kid dreams about, being in the World Series. And then again, lucky enough to be on a team that wins the World Series, on an iconic team that's still talked about today. I've got no regrets. I've got nothing to complain about. And I'm very appreciative to people like yourself who still want to talk about it, and remind me about how lucky I was as a baseball player to be part of that team. And so me, I'm say a little prayer every day to having been part of it, because like you said, not many kids get a chance to do it. You have to be in the right place at the right time. I saw a lot of kids that I grew up with who were great players that either got hurt or couldn't make it. Guys in the minors who looked to me like they were no brainers. They were going to make it, and somehow they got weeded out for whatever reason. So I'm very lucky, and injuries did they take their toll on me. I got hurt a lot and number of operations, but I can't begrudge anybody today, and I'm so thankful that I had a chance to play, got a chance to play 13 years, and so for me, I feel very, very lucky.
I have to ask you a question that's been in my mind for a very long time, Art. So you have two guys that have similar talents. One guy excels, the other guy does not. Is it because the guy who excels is thinking positively? Is it because he's thinking that he can't fail and he's going to catch the ball and he's going to hit, versus the other guy who's saying, "Oh my God, don't hit it to me," or "What if I don't catch the ball?" Did that ever pop into your mind along the way?
It's a good question. I think about guys, like I said, I saw guys who to me looked like they were going to make it the big leagues easy. I mean, guys that great arms, pitchers, great hitters, fielders, whatever it was. I think a lot of it's timing. A lot of it's being in an organization back in those days where there was no free agency. You couldn't make it, and you got weeded out for whatever reason. You either got hurt, they put in a bad report, some scout up there who was stuffing his face with hot dogs and having sodas or drinks, and he's writing a report on you. You might have a bad game, and that was it. Didn't follow up with the next game, didn't see how you played, and then you get labeled, unfortunately. And I think that happened a lot. Again, it was timing, being in an organization that you got a chance to make it up there. And I remember when I got traded to the Mets from the Cincinnati Reds, and I got that call from the general manager, and I thought it was the worst day in my life because I'm leaving the Reds, going to a bad team. I didn't really like New York. And at that moment, I thought, just what's going to happen to my career? And it turned out it became the best break I ever had. You know, I would have liked to have been on the big red machine, but who can trade that? I'd trade that for being part of the '69 Mets. So for me, it turned out to be a blessing. So I think it's all timing. And there are some guys who have an 0 for 4 in a game, and I took the game home with me. And there was a lot of times that I think it hurt me. I would take the game home and I'd worry about a strikeout. Even if I got a couple hits in the game, I think about a strikeout if I had a runner on second base or third base. It didn't help the team win a ball game. But there are guys who shrug it off, who are able to bounce back the next day, and those guys are the guys that can get through a lot of tough times.
Mindset, yeah. So
Mindset,
I mean, you know, let's face it, you did play in an era where there was only 16 teams. It's not as watered down as it is today. It's a lot harder to make it to the club. There's far fewer players, and here you're going up against the giants of baseball history. Bob Gibson in 1968 set the ERA record, 1.12 ERA, and you had to bat against him. So, you know, that to me is fascinating, how a player can get up there knowing I'm facing, you know, Sandy Koufax, the greatest pitcher arguably ever. I'm facing Bob
I think,
Gibson.
yeah, I think as a hitter, what you have to do is remind yourself this is a game of percentages. It's always no other game in sports is where you fail 7 out of 10 times and you're going to be a star. And I think what you tell yourself is, yeah, you're going to hit some balls good and it's going to be caught, and you're going to get some numbers that fall in for base hits. So you got to just understand that that's the philosophy of the game, or that's the way the game is. But I think what boggles me in the game, there's so many strikeouts. Guys don't try to put the ball in play. It's all about home runs and doubles and RBIs. And I think that's not the game that I remember as a kid growing up. And it was always about putting the ball in play and understanding the game is about a game of percentages. But you're right. I think it's a mindset on guys who really couldn't handle an 0 for 4, had a bad game, and couldn't bounce back in another day or two. And the other side of the coin is guys just got hurt. Guys were, you know, they don't have the medicine back then that they have today. They don't have the rehabilitation techniques that they have today. And guys get hurt, and once you got hurt, I remember telling somebody, a wise man once telling me, he said, "Don't stay out of that trainer's room. Stay out of there. Don't let them see you in the trainer's room.
Stay away from that drain pipe, you know, in the outfield."
Yeah, they're gonna find a way. If you can't play, they'll get somebody else in, and you get out there again. So I think that was what I tried to do. But unfortunately, I got hurt. But I think that to answer your question, I think just a lot of it was mindset and a lot of it's timing.
Yeah. So my last question is, you know, what lessons did the game of baseball and being a world champion teach you in retrospect 52 years later?
Well, baseball is a wonderful sport, no matter what level you play. To teach you teamwork, humility, how to deal with failure, how to rely on your teammates to help you get through wins and get through tough days. And I think baseball is always going to be that. Again, I feel very lucky to have been part of this incredible team that still is talked about today, and that's why I stay visible. I tweet. I'm on Twitter. Do the podcast. I try to get people to go to my website to order books and to talk to me or comment on things, and I try to just stay visible because I think it's important. I don't want to drop out, so to speak. I want to stay out there and be visible, and people still want to talk to me about that '69 team. And I make a lot of personal appearances on Zoom. Obviously Zoom this past year, and hopefully things will open up pretty soon. I'll be able to go out and do some personal appearances in person. But I just try to stay connected because I think it's important for people to want to know about my career, about my life, about playing for that '69 team. And so for me, I think that's the lessons I've learned, is just to stay visible and always remember that humility is very important. I don't take things for granted anymore. being part of that 69 team, I feel very lucky. Let me just a very quick story about that year. That season in spring training in 69, I got hurt in spring training. I played in 2 or 3 games and missed the whole rest of spring training with an injured back. I started the season on the disabled list. I missed the first 21 days of the season. My life went full circle. I did not know if I was going to be playing baseball anymore, let alone be on a world championship team. And I had doubts about myself and what was going to happen to my career. And all of a sudden, my life went full circle and ended up on a world championship team. So I don't take anything for granted. I'm very thankful that I get a chance to speak to people like yourself who understand that how important that team was. And I'm very grateful for that opportunity, because I know how important it was to be part of that team and how important we were to the fans of New York.
Art, how can people find out more about your books and about Art Shamsky if they wanted to hire you for their event?
Well, they can go to my website. I have books. They can still probably get books at bookstores and Magnificent Seasons, and of course After the Miracle. But what I recommend people to do is go to my website, because they can then get the book, order the book on the website, and then I can do a personal salutation. If they get it at a bookstore, whatever way they get it, and then they got to track me down somehow and send it to me by mail, or they could go to a personal appearance, which hopefully there'll be some personal appearance.
And your website is?
www.artshamsky.com.
Easy to remember.
And the podcast is the Art Shamsky podcast, and it's on all the major podcast platforms like iHeart and Spotify and Stitcher and Apple. And so I try to do that every other week and get something up there, whether it's sports or entertainment, and again, stay connected. And so, and Twitter, it's at Art Shamsky, very simple. And I try to do some things to Twitter just to generate some kind of feedback from people and conversation. And just, again, my goal is really to stay visible and stay out there.
For those listening, go get yourself the book, After the Miracle. You'll enjoy it as much as I have. It's been a pleasure today to have number 24, the great Art Shamsky, on our program. And I want to thank you for helping me to fulfill one of my bucket lists in interviewing a 1969 New York Mets world champion. Thank you, Art.
You're a great interviewer. Thank you so much for having me on, and best of luck, and stay well and stay healthy.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We love our listeners, and we believe you have greatness within you. If you like The Motivation Show, we appreciate you subscribing, rating, and reviewing us. Check out EliMarcusSuccess.com to hear more inspiring shows and to read our motivational blog. That's EliMarcusSuccess.com.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.